After the alien invasion, humanity is forced to hide in underground bunkers. The world leaders of Earth are desperately trying to keep people underground. But there is a soldier who kills one of the enemies and discovers a terrible truth. But think shelter immediately. The nonsense could attack at any moment. 50 years after the attack of something, all of humanity lives underground, although there are those who refuse to descend into the bunkers. An ordinary person can return to the surface only by becoming a soldier and serving the standard term, 100 days. One day, a soldier with the call sign Someone completes his required training and boards a tank to travel to the outpost Cerberus, where he must serve his shift. On the way, the military encounters people running towards the shelter, which is called Exilium. The soldiers disembark one by one as they reach their assigned posts. Finally, it's someone's turn. However, the soldier cannot immediately enter the bunker as the door is jammed, so he climbs the watchtower to contact the command. The soldier undergoes DNA identification and the system congratulates him on the start of his 100-day service. He will have to monitor the territory, track something, and send those who stray into the shelter. The protective ring is in order, there are no breaches, all cameras are functioning, and the power supply is stable. But upon arrival at the post, the soldier does not find the person he was supposed to replace, which is a breach of protocol. The commander reassures Someone. The former watchman with the call sign VAX 7 was evacuated for medical reasons. He was called up from the reserves and now he must strictly adhere to all the rules. He must not leave his zone and must be very vigilant because his vigilance is a condition for survival of humanity. They provide him with a daily access code and instruct him on how to enter the bunker through a secret passage, allowing him to go outside for this purpose. Someone begins to settle in. Finally inside, he discovers that the room is neglected and empty. Someone arranges his rations, lights a cigarette, and polishes a glass, listening to the system's reminders to think about the safety of himself and his family. At night, he dreams of laughing children, but the daily alarm clock reminds him of how many days are left until the end of his active service, and Someone begins his daily routine. Exercises, showers, territory check, and food from his rations. During lunch, he suddenly hears strange sounds and sees movement in the corner of the room, but doesn't have time to understand what it is. Later, he reports everything to the commander, but the commander reassures him everything is proceeding as usual. At night, Someone sees children playing again. In the morning, the routine of the previous day repeats: exercises, shower, food, and the one regulated cigarette. Every day is an exact copy of the previous one. There are 87 days left until the end of his service when Someone manages to catch an unknown creature which turns out to be a white rat. However, the animal escapes without allowing itself to be properly examined. Immediately, there is a report of an attack by something on the refugees and there is no one left alive. Someone activates the system check and it reports that the defense lines are not damaged. But the soldier clearly sees movement in the bushes on the monitoring screen and reports it to the commander. The commander dismisses any intrusion and asks not to worry. There are 71 days left until the end of the term. The rat that Someone named Doctor is no longer afraid of humans and he feeds it. One day there is an alert about a malfunction in one of the cameras and the soldier goes outside to perform technical maintenance on the security system. He surveys the outpost's territory, fixes the camera, and finds a dead bird hanging from a tree with a token bearing his predecessor's number. Right away, the system alerts him to toxic emissions and the soldier heads towards the bunker. Upon returning to the bunker, he reports everything that happened at the post, including the discovery of the token, to the commander. But all his concerns are quickly dismissed. The commander assures him that VAX 7 simply fell ill and is now in the bunker, recovering. The commander's overly cheerful tone makes him doubt even more. There are 65 days left. The United Nations warns of danger, urging people not to stay on the surface as resistance against something is futile. One day, Someone goes out onto the territory once again, and after a warning about toxic emissions, he notices an unfamiliar creature in the depths of the forest that quickly escapes from him. He reports it again, but the defense ring is intact and there is no cause for alarm. Someone decides to investigate the bunker and finds a blood stain on the wall, leading him to suspect that Vax 7 may have shot himself and was never evacuated. The soldier tries to access the video camera recordings from the closet where it happened, but the system denies him access. So someone decides to break into the locker belonging to Vax 7 and discovers a sketchbook and a radio receiver. Among the drawings, he finds a sketch of his own post, Cerberus, and a neighboring post, Graham, sparking his interest. There are 54 days left until the end of his term. Someone increasingly thinks about the neighboring post and one day decides to go to Graham to try to establish contact. However, he finds that he cannot cross the perimeter because an implant in his leg activates pain with any attempt to leave the ring. The audio commands insistently urge him to return to Cerberus. He decides to take a step back and climb a tree, hoping to establish contact by waving his hand and shouting to Graham, but he receives no response. Returning to his post, he reviews the archive files and suddenly he discovers some creature on the internal camera and the electricity goes out. Behind him, the soldier distinctly feels someone's movement, even though the equipment insists that there is no intrusion. Someone rushes outside and even shoots at the bushes, scaring off a bird. He reports the malfunction to the commander, who promises to send a repairman and reminds him of his duty, especially with only 40 days left. Someone tries once again to access the archive but finds it impossible as the data has been lost due to an electrical surge. The next day starts as usual, but suddenly the soldier feels unwell. He takes medication and accidentally cuts his finger when he suddenly hears a cheerful children's song coming from the predecessor's closet. It turns out that Vax 7's radio is turned on and the neighbor from Graham Post is calling out to his old acquaintance. He quickly realizes that it's a different person and cuts the conversation short, despite pleas to talk to him. The electricity surges again and the soldier reminds about the specialist. The commander then tells him about an attack on a post where no one survived, so reaching distant outposts is very risky. Several more days pass. Someone starts going outside more often, and one day he discovers a woman and a child hiding from him in a cave. He tries to convince them to come down to the bunker, but the two of them run away, seemingly more afraid of him than of something. Returning inside, he hears a warning about several lost individuals in danger. However, now the soldier is not sure if they want to be saved. He talks to the rat more and more, telling it about the children in his dreams. It turns out that the ability to dream has become a thing of the past, but he has suddenly acquired it. This is seen as a sign of a mental illness. Someone keeps trying to contact his neighbor, but there is no response. One night, the soldier ventures out into the territory and kills a huge deer, which he dissects and eagerly consumes. He behaves more and more like a wild man, shooting at targets and walking without his helmet. One day, he makes another attempt to contact Graham, sending a signal with a mirror, but still receives no response, which infuriates him. On his way back, he enters a zone of toxic emissions and almost loses consciousness. In a semi-delirious state, he sees the strange creature again, which runs away from him. Regaining his senses, he tries to convey to his neighbor his belief that Vax 7 is likely being held in the forest, but Graham remains silent. There are 14 days left until the end of his shift when a repairman finally arrives at the post. He reports on a recent attack and the deaths of many people. The man is displeased, sensing the presence of the rat. He explains that the soldier's predecessor was friends with the rat, considering it the height of foolishness. The technician dispels someone's fears, explaining that the shadow on the wall is himself due to a system glitch. Strangely, the cameras in the defense ring are turned off, even though the soldier checked them just now. Then the rat climbs onto the table, and upon seeing it, the repairman forcefully shoves it away. The soldier rushes to the motionless rat and pleads with it not to die, which infuriates the repairman even further. The soldier aims his gun at the repairman, ordering him to disable the internal camera and unlock the archive video recordings. The repairman refuses and someone hits him. However, he still can't do anything because the access requires the personal codes of two guards. A fight erupts between the two men. Someone sustains several injuries but eventually emerges victorious. Afterward, the repairman shares his experience of encountering something. When he was a soldier, his helicopter crashed in the desert. Of all the survivors, only he and his partner remained. The repairman went for help, and when he returned, he found the second soldier without ears. It turns out that something affects people through sound, and the guy cut off his own ears to avoid hearing the horrifying noise. During a sandstorm, they saw a huge shadow circling around them, but they never understood what it was. When he was eventually found, his lungs were filled with sand, and he had an unexplained catheter in his throat. The soldier locks the repairman in the bunker, tends to his wounds, and reports to the commander that everything is in order. Afterward, he figures out that he can access his predecessor's information through his radio. Finally, he manages to open the archive footage, which makes it clear that Vax 7 did indeed go insane due to exhaustion and stress. Someone shares this information with his neighbor. The soldier is overwhelmed with conspiracy theories. He is convinced that the leadership is deceiving the common people by inventing something, as no one has actually seen it. The mission to send people underground is a ploy to restrict the consumption of dwindling natural resources while the rich and powerful enjoy the leftovers. He requests a meeting with his neighbor, who reluctantly agrees. There are 7 days left when, upon hearing another system announcement about something attacking, someone flies into a rage and smashes the alarm with the jar into which the rat has just climbed. Realizing that he killed his own friend, he walks outside naked and once again encounters the monstrous creature. Extracting a pair of deer antlers from a tree, he mortally wounds the monster, only to recognize Vax 7 by a tattoo on his neck. He returns to release the repairman and tells him about the conspiracy, convinced that it was his predecessor's tales that drove him mad. But no one will deceive someone anymore because he's no longer afraid. The soldier demands to know where the power can be cut off because he intends to save the people by disabling the defense lines. The repairman is horrified. He will doom humanity, but he obeys the madman. Someone contacts his neighbor and informs him of his decision that he is coming to him. It's time to put an end to the madness that keeps people on the ground and make them free.
Okay. If it were a plague, where are all the bodies?
American tourists, a young couple named Janai and Riley, arrive in Iceland to admire the magnificent nature and spend some time alone together. They check into a hotel and begin their sightseeing with a visit to a geothermal pool. Janai knows that Riley has spent all his savings on this trip and appreciates it. Though Riley doesn't think he did anything extraordinary, he just wanted to make his beloved happy. Janai notices that Riley brought his father's Rolleiflex camera and a lot of film. She is surprised that he prefers this outdated technology over a modern digital camera, but Riley explains that he dreams of capturing the imperfections of the moment rather than having a computer program automatically correct all the mistakes. He admits he's still learning, but he's striving for perfection and promises to take her portrait. One day they visit an old church, and a priest tells them its history. The man is convinced that life in pre-Christian times was simpler. It was an era of long journeys and discoveries. The couple tours the island's landmarks, goofing around and capturing everything on camera. Later, Janai tells Riley that her father is a preacher, although his church isn't as beautiful. She often visited there and, of course, believes in God. They then explore the waterfalls, and Janai is thrilled by the beauty. They are very happy and consider the trip wonderful. However, at night, Janai can't sleep. It's too bright outside. She looks out the window and sees strange flashes of light in the distance, mistaking them for an exceptionally bright aurora borealis. But exhaustion takes over, and she falls asleep. In the morning, Riley wakes Janai up at 10 a.m., not noticing the date that appeared on his digital watch, 2028. Janai, however, still lives in her own time and finds it hard to wake up. The constant daylight outside is also a challenge for her. Nevertheless, she somehow manages to get out of bed. The couple heads out for breakfast, but it turns out that no one has prepared it. In fact, there's a strange silence and emptiness all around. There's no sign of the staff, nor of other guests. Riley suggests they go to a cafe, and the couple steps outside, but here too the emptiness reigns. There isn't a single passerby, although the traffic lights work perfectly and the signs above the establishments and shops are brightly lit. They are puzzled. Maybe there's an event in the city today, or a holiday? Riley remembers the solstice, an ancient celebration, and wonders if all the townspeople, young and old, have gone to it. The couple walks down an utterly deserted street, occasionally shouting, but there's no one around, no staff in the shops, and no one responds to their calls. Their personal phone calls also go unanswered. Soon, Riley and Janai enter an empty cafe where Riley notices several working televisions, but every channel shows everything except the news. Janai starts to panic. Riley is equally baffled. If there was a plague, where are the bodies? If aliens are to blame, where is their ship? There are no new emails or posts on the internet, no activity at all. They return to their room, where Janai continues to call her relatives and friends, but all remain silent. The internet works, but there are no updates. Riley launches a world map view, but the same picture is everywhere. Empty cities. He takes Janai outside again. Soon they notice a working car, and without being able to find the owner, they simply take it. The couple drives around the city and eventually reaches the church, but everywhere there is the same silence and emptiness. Then they drive out of the city, but it's the same there. Their parents do not answer the calls. Only answering machines are working everywhere. They continue to speculate about the causes of what happened. Riley suggests various theories, even the possibility of the second coming, but Janai is tired and wants to sleep, so they return to their room. In the morning, Riley suggests making breakfast, but Janai is completely drained and doesn't want to move. She dreams of leaving the island, but how can they do that? And she is also tormented by thoughts of being chosen. Maybe they were needed for something by God. After all, it's impossible to explain what happened otherwise. Riley, on the other hand, believes it's all about a virus, and it's quite possible that the entire population of the island simply fled. Riley tries to remain optimistic. He makes coffee for Janai and then takes her to the store. Filling the trunks of 2 SUVs with groceries, he drives Janai to a house they have chosen. Later, they go to a store and pick out new clothes for themselves. Riley explains that the electricity on the island is powered by geothermal energy, so most likely it will continue to function for a long time until the equipment breaks down. Riley does his best to distract Janai from sad thoughts. They drink at a bar and then play strip games, but in the morning they suffer from hangovers. Janai again talks about being tested, but faith and religion are not the same, and who knows what God has planned. However, for now, this world belongs only to them. They continue to tour the island, and Riley takes pictures of Janai in all the scenic spots. One day they find a geothermal pool and enjoy a bath there. Then they make love and sleep right on the grass. When she wakes up, Janai admires the beauty of the island's nature, while Riley tirelessly photographs her. One day they go to get groceries, and while Janai punches cereal boxes, Riley, riding a shopping cart, falls and injures his arm. In the evening, he invites Janai to a romantic dinner. The couple dresses up and Janai applies makeup, but once they sit at the table, she immediately starts an unpleasant conversation because she can't stop thinking about what happened during the day and pressures Riley to promise not to put himself at risk again. After all, what would happen to her if something happened to him? They are completely alone here, and no one can help them. Janai sinks deeper into depression despite Riley's promise to take care of himself. She remembers her home and a book that is very dear to her. Her father once gave it to her, and she turned it into a kind of diary, writing down the events of her life on its blank pages. She even confessed her love for the first time there, and now she dreams of just holding it in her hands. Riley reminds her that they have each other, and they will be able to survive. After all of humanity's achievements are at their disposal. However, time passes and the food in the stores starts to expire. Janai is very annoyed by Riley's habit of eating perishable foods out of order, as he doesn't think about tomorrow at all. Soon the electricity will run out, which means there will be no more meat. To this, Riley suggests they take up farming and hunting, which only makes Janai laugh. Well, he might shoot a cow, but what will he do with it then? Janai increasingly wanders around the area alone, and one day coming to the church, she asks the figures around it questions. Maybe it's only they who have been thrown out of life, while everyone else is now at home? Why did this happen to her? Seeing Janai's bad mood, Riley tries to cheer her up. They continue to explore the island, as he knows its history quite well and believes that the heart of the earth beats here. But unlike Riley, Janai doesn't feel the specialness of this place. One day he shows her the old remains of a plane he found while exploring the area. Riley calls it beautiful, but Janai sees it only as a reminder of the dead world they now inhabit. It's trash, just like them, and no one will come for them. An angry Janai drives away, but later returns for Riley, who is calmly sleeping in the wreckage of the plane. Now Riley spends more and more time on the empty city streets, photographing everything that seems interesting to him. Then he throws away the film because there's nowhere to develop it. He roams the shops and one day remembers that if the electricity runs out, there will be no water in the house. He collects all the necessary items in a hardware store and takes them home. One day, absent-mindedly entering an elevator, he panics when the doors close. After all, no one will be able to find him if the electricity goes out. Meanwhile, Janai goes to the cinema and cries as memories flood over her. In the meantime, Riley sets up a water collection system with a wind-powered motor in the yard, and Janai finds an abandoned farm and rides a horse. Later, she listens to the voicemails from friends and relatives saved on her phone. Then she takes Riley to a place in the countryside she likes. She is surprised that Riley continues to photograph everything, but he promises that he will find a way to develop the film. Janai points out that they are sitting on a glacier, a force of nature that kills all living things. Maybe God has also run out of patience? Later they return to the city, and while Riley is busy with his tasks, Janai finds a photographer's studio. One day they enter a flower shop, and Janai is very upset to find that all the plants have long died. Realizing that Janai is depressed by the decaying city, Riley suggests they go camping. He persuades her that it's time to find a place where they can live in comfort and plenty. Soon Riley notices a house by the lake that seems suitable. The couple goes inside, and even Janai has to admit that the place is very beautiful. However, while exploring the area, they stumble upon an old man named Niels, who is very weak from lack of food. The couple gladly shares their supplies with him. Niels is shocked that there are no other survivors and believes that the end of the world has come. When it all happened, he was also in the city but returned to his home, where he once left his family. Janai, who was very happy to find another survivor, is deeply upset by Niels's defeatist attitude. The old man tells her about his family life. In his youth, he would leave his family for long periods to earn money by fishing. When he returned, he found that they had changed. His son had grown up, and his wife had fallen out of love with him because he was always away. He accepts God's will because it's people who live in the world he created, not the other way round. And he advises Janai not to give up, for she is human and therefore must fight. Although if there is some divine plan, humanity has failed to fulfill it. The next morning, Riley informs Janai that Niels has died. Janai is shocked by this. Riley says he found a cemetery by the lake where he chose a spot next to Niels's family, but Janai isn't sure that these people missed the man during his life and would be glad to see him now. Riley is puzzled by Janai's thoughts, but she suggests they not bury the man at all since no one needs it. Riley tries to remind her of human customs, and Janai suddenly thinks that there might be others who need their help. After returning to the city, Janai becomes obsessed with searching for other survivors. She drives house to house, marking the empty ones with red tape. Riley suggests that she is looking for answers where there are none, and that instead they should try to make the most of their new life. But Janai isn't sure this can be called life. While Janai rushes around the city, Riley finishes building his wind turbine in the yard. Time passes. The couple continues to walk around the island, and Riley continues to photograph Janai. One day he takes her to a waterfall and says that water is always alive. It flows, freezes, melts, and flows again. Life tries. There is no yesterday or tomorrow here. There is only today. They need to try to understand this and survive. But Janai interrupts his musings with a kiss. Later they return to the house, and Janai notices that the water is running out. She washes the dishes in a basin while Riley goes to sleep. Suddenly she notices an email on the laptop. Janai opens it with trepidation and cries when she realizes it's a photo from Riley. Morning comes. Riley goes to the kitchen where a large envelope addressed to him is lying on the table. He connects his water system and opens the envelope. Inside are printed photos of Janai, but the girl herself is nowhere to be found, and this worries Riley. He rushes out to find her, visiting all the places they liked. Meanwhile, his system starts working, and water flows into the house without the need for electricity. Riley continues to drive around the island and finally finds Janai's body floating in a geothermal pool. Realizing that she did this voluntarily, he at first also wants to end his life and jumps into the water, but soon he resurfaces and climbs out. Riley cries as he sits by her body, then lays her on the grass, not knowing what to do now. Then he simply leaves, abandoning the girl by the pool. Riley gets into the car, drives onto the road, and drives for a long time without holding the wheel, but gradually his hands lower onto the steering wheel, and he firmly grips it as if deciding to keep living. The film is called bokeh, the blurred parts of a photograph that the photographer uses to highlight other parts of the image that they consider more significant. The director similarly highlights the main contrast, the two diametrically opposed positions of the last people on Earth. The man immediately accepts the situation as it is and intends to live on, while the woman falls into depression and begins to search for the meaning of what happened. So what chance does humanity have for rebirth under such circumstances? Hey guys, today I will tell you about the second season of the fantasy drama from 2020, Warrior Nuns, based on the series of comics of the same name by artist and writer Ben Dunn.
Is this our thing now?
While swimming in the pool, Ava recalls what has happened to her since she went from being a paralyzed simpleton to a warrior nun wielding a mystical halo. The girl's musings are interrupted by a phone signal reminding her of her duty. Once a member of the Order of the Cruciform Sword, she's now in a hurry for her regular job at the cafe. Arriving for her shift, Ava listens to customers talk about the explosion at the Vatican and rumors that it was Angel Adriel himself who broke out of the basement, proclaiming himself a mission. Miguel intervenes in the company's conversation, mocking the legends about angels and miraculous cure of the infected, calling Adriel an imposter. Left alone with Ava, Miguel tries to get her opinion, but the girl says she doesn't think about the subject at all, fearing that she might expose herself. A colleague asks Ava to go upstairs to her boss's office, and Beatrice also asks her friend to talk less to visitors about legends so as not to draw suspicion to herself. On her way home in the evening, Ava can't get away from the prophet fanatics handing out religious leaflets. One of them annoys the girl so much that she uses her power and pushes him aside. Meanwhile, in the monastery in Spain, having finished watching videos on social media with her friends, Camilla goes down to see Mother Superior. The woman instructs the girl to go to London. According to the order, one of the ministers is possessed by a demonic ghost. The girl agrees without any complaints, but Mother Superior sees that something is bothering her. Camilla confesses that there's no way she can come to terms with Mary's disappearance. Portugal. Drunken Father Vincent always walks looking over his shoulder, and it turns out that that's for a good reason. Out of nowhere, he is attacked by Lilith, and the old man can only save his life by telling her that Mary is alive. The Bishop of the Vatican agrees to an audience with nun Yasmin Monet. The girl says that she's preparing an article about the lost Christian artifacts, but she immediately directs the conversation to rumors about Adriel and the attack on the Vatican. This changes the bishop's mood, but the nun keeps pushing, claiming that she has learned about a certain female order in the course of her investigation. To avoid spilling the beans, the priest ends the meeting, but Yasmin isn't upset. She has managed to hack into the network. Jillian sits by the archway, which has finally begun to come to life, but the field still hasn't stabilized and the girl can't get through the portal. Any attempt to use the portal ends up leaving burn marks on her hands. Christian is thrilled by her colleague's discoveries, but he guesses that she's only driven by a desire to find her son Michael, who has disappeared into another world. Christian asks Jillian to sign the renovation documents for the building he bought for the company, Arctech. After looking at the documents, the woman begins to doubt their contents, but deciding not to offend her friend with mistrust, she signs them. Ava continues her training by running over water, but at one point her strength leaves her and she falls. The girl admits to Beatrice that she's tired of sitting around while Adriel gains strength. However, her older friend reminds her that they have an uphill battle ahead of them. Christian arrives at the Vatican and declares that Jillian has given him full control of Arctech. He wants to merge the company with the church on condition that the bishop accepts the appearance of a new prophet, Adriel. The bishop realizes that the impostor has fooled yet another fanatic. Miguel comes back to the bar and confesses to the girl that he volunteers in the community of Samaritans fighting Adriel and they need the people like Ava. Mother Superior Susanna calls the bishop and asks the Vatican to intervene. Adriel is gaining strength and he has managed to fool hundreds of Catholics already. The priest believes that it is too early to sound the alarm. First, he should make a statement that Adriel is an impostor, and if that doesn't work, call on the Order of the Cruciform Sword for help. This conversation is overheard by Yasmin. She has just received a confirmation of her hunch. Vincent arrives at his residence and escorts Lilith inside, telling the guards that she's his friend. Ava convinces Beatrice to have some fun and have a couple of shots. The girls are having carefree fun. Meanwhile, at the Italian convent on her way to dinner, Mother Superior sees a gruesome picture. The bodies of the nuns in crimson puddles lie in the parish yard. At night, the nuns return home from the bar, and Ava notices Miguel, who is acting strangely. She decides to follow him and witnesses the guy getting beaten up by a crowd of fanatic hooligans. Ava helps her friend, and they are joined by Beatrice, who didn't really like the suspicious guy before. The young people tell her about the Samaritans, and the nun decides to accept Miguel's help in their fight against Adriel. Meanwhile, Mother Superior tries to warn the other monasteries where members of the order are based. However, the light bulbs on the map go out one by one, which means the warrior nuns are either destroyed or they leave their outposts. The company decides to sneak into the headquarters of Adriel followers, the firstborn sons. But seeing that the members of the sect are leaving with some cargo, the friends decide to follow them. Mother Superior orders Camilla to pack their things so they can hide and lay low as soon as possible. But suddenly the nuns notice that the light on the map has not gone out on the Madrid cell, which means there are still living members of the order out there. Father Vincent leads Lilith into the prison, promising that Mary is sitting in one of the cells. But as soon as the witch comes in sight, the priest locks the door behind her. On the other side, dozens of warriors come out at the girl, but Lilith easily dispatches them. The company watches as fanatics stack a prayer circle with a cross in the field and begin to pray. At this point, Ava's attention is attracted by a strange sound, and turning around, the girl sees a cloud of locusts rushing at them. On their way back, the friends try to explain what they have seen, and seeing how the girls are calm about everything, Miguel suspects something is wrong. Ava has to confess that they are the nuns of the order, but he takes it as a joke. Left alone, the girls decide that everything that is happening is a biblical execution reproduced by Adriel. Mother Superior and Camilla fly to Madrid and look for the headquarters of the order, which is housed in a flower store. From the scattered flowers, it is clear that something terrible has happened here as well. Yasmin confesses that she summoned Mother Superior to show her the bodies of the dead sisters. The nuns try to find out how Yasmin knew about them, but she says she can only reveal the truth to the warrior nun. Miguel comes to Ava's work and invites her to interrogate one of the firstborns they took. To sneak away, the girl cuts her arm, but the wound immediately disappears, much to Miguel's surprise. Beatrice asks her friend to stay out of it. The Samaritans have illegally kidnapped a man, and they shouldn't get involved. But Ava stubbornly does her own thing. Yasmin suggested the nuns take up residence in her room, but not wanting to risk it, the women choose their own hiding place and put the stranger to sleep so that she won't see the path they take to get there. Meanwhile, Lilith escapes from the prison and arrives at her mother's house. Miguel brings his new friends to the Samaritan headquarters, and when the boys begin interrogating the prisoner, Ava sees the devil in him. Father Vincent arrives at the main square, and seconds later, locusts appear there. The townspeople become scared. Suddenly, Adriel appears and saves the terrified people, thus earning a new addition to the army of fans. Even the priests from the Vatican begin to believe in Adriel's power. The bishop speaks with his subordinates, demanding that the impostor not be glorified. The mother rebukes Lilith for losing the battle for the halo and for failing to live up to her hopes by losing her place in the Order of the Cruciform Sword. Yasmin comes to her senses and tells the nuns that she grew up in a family that helps the order, and now the girl must find the owner of the halo, Ava, and give her her secret. Looking at Ava, the prisoner recognizes her as the owner of the halo and demands that she return it to its true owner, Adriel. Beatrice knocks the chatty kid out, but he breaks the ropes and frees himself. The demon proves to be very strong, and the warrior nuns cannot defeat him until Ava activates her halo and banishes the entity out of the boy. Beatrice hurries to get her friend out of the way to avoid any more questions. Adriel shows up at the bishop's office and offers to join forces, admitting that the boy is indeed the son of God. But just as the priest refuses and asks the madman to leave, Adriel displays a couple of tricks demonstrating his power. The prophet leaves, but his offer still stands. Lilith comes to Dr. Jillian for help and asks her to examine the scales that have appeared on her shoulder. While sitting in Dr. Jillian's office, the nun sees an emergency call from the Sisters of the Order, but she refuses to go to Madrid. While packing to escape again, Ava and Beatrice quarrel, but they are interrupted by a signal on her older friend's chest. She tells a student that they have been summoned to Madrid. The second message arrives with news from Lilith that the order has lost Mary. Vincent shows Adriel the signal and instructs the old man to join the women. Despite the gravity of the situation, Ava is excited about her trip to Madrid. Finally, the girls find the flower store where Mother Superior has left a movie ticket for them. The nuns have to scramble to avoid falling into the hands of the hunters. On the street, the girls spot a tail and have to get rid of it, but in an alleyway they are awaited by Vincent, who puts Beatrice to sleep. The priest tries to convince Ava that Adriel is the true prophet and she should go with him to return the prophet's halo, but the girl takes to flight and manages to defeat the old man. The girls make it to the movie theater where they finally meet Camilla. The nun takes her friends to the hiding place, the cellar beneath the cinema, where old Mother Superior is already waiting for them. The old woman gets straight to the point. She tells the sisters about the attack on the order and says that the time has come to do her duty. Yasmin comes out to the girls, and when Ava is beside her, the girl's pendant glows blue and she recognizes the warrior nun. Now Yasmin can reveal the secret of how to defeat Adriel. Jillian offers Lilith to cure the problem with a pass through the archway, but the girl realizes that the doctor needs it in order for her to find his son there. Yasmin tells the girls about the crown of thorns that can defeat the imposter. Meanwhile, traitors begin to appear in the Vatican, among those close to the bishop. As Yasmin continues talking about the crown, she reveals a secret. The thorny garment is not only a means of torture, it also disempowers the likes of Adriel. The only problem is that the wreath was stolen years ago and is now stored in a museum, but Ava doesn't see this as an obstacle and the girls go out on a tour. Disabling the cameras and distracting the guards, the nuns head for the exhibit. However, the only way to know that it's the right wreath is for Eva to touch it. Lilith makes up her mind, and wearing a special suit, she enters the archway, but a second later she is thrown back. She's shocked because she felt that she had been on the other side of the portal for almost 2 hours, and she was clearly not welcome there. The bishop goes down to the prison to visit the traitor and learn from him how Adriel creates the punishments of heaven. To make the prisoner more talkative, the priest tries medieval torture methods on him. At first, the impostor's henchman tolerates the pain, assuring him that Adriel is the real Son of God and all miracles are real. However, when the torture becomes unbearable, he admits that the prophet is collaborating with Arctech and the company uses its technology to create illusions. Lilith tries to understand why someone threw her out, and Jillian promises to deal with it next time. But the girl has no intention of entering the archway again, and she makes that clear to the doctor. After the conversation, Lilith disappears, forgetting the cross in the office. At night, the girls return to the museum to retrieve the crown. Mother Superior eliminates the guard, and the group of nuns sneaks in, sending old camera footage to the security monitors and disabling the laser alarms. Using the halo, Ava takes the crown, but nothing happens to it, and her friends ask Yasmin to help. Jillian decodes the tape from Lilith's camera, and as she speeds up, she sees someone's face on it. While the nuns are searching for the real wreath, Camilla notices that there is someone else in the museum beside them. Ava finally finds the artifact, but at that moment Camilla sees Adriel, and Vincent appears in front of the warriors and puts the crown on the girl's head, thereby depriving her of her superpowers and taking her with him. While Vincent is carrying Ava, the girl has terrible visions. She finally regains consciousness. Before leaving the exhausted girl in a dark alleyway, Vincent promises to pray for her before Adriel destroys her. But suddenly, Miguel comes to the girl's aid. By some miracle, he also happens to have superpowers. He says that explanations can wait, and having dealt with the priest, Miguel and Ava run away. Lilith comes to Adriel and, showing him her crusted hands, asks for his help. The nuns load Vincent into a car and drive off in search of Ava, shaking the cops on the way. The young people are finally safe, and Miguel returns Ava's crown and admits that he was sent from the other side of the arch to protect her. As they talk, a crowd of primitives in gas masks passes them, and Ava guesses that the new punishment awaits the city. In the meantime, the nuns get stuck on the road because of a flat tire. Miguel leads Ava to the gates of a cemetery, assuring her that he knows a way to destroy Adriel. All the while, the girl keeps seeing terrible visions, but she tries not to pay attention to them. After stealing a food delivery car, the nuns drive on, and Camilla recalls that the entire company has been hungry for a long time. After rummaging through the shelves, the girl finds something they can refresh themselves with, unusually shaped cakes that go down well with the sisters. Jillian arrives at the building she recently bought, and in the center the doctor sees a ritual cross and sectarians. Christian is also among them. Jillian asks Christian to explain what he has been doing all this time with her company and the building. Instead, Christian begins to talk about the all-powerful Adriel who will soon conquer the whole world. Beatrice arrives at the cemetery looking for her friend, but the gas Adriel sprays as part of the next execution makes her scared. The girl removes a gas mask from one of the firstborns. Miguel and Ava daringly walk into Adriel's sect's church, and the two witness a ritual in which a demon possesses a teenager. Ava wonders how to stop all of this, but Miguel asks her to protect the crown and steps forward to take the hit. The guy's plan works. He lets himself be possessed by the demon, and then by painting in blue, he banishes it to show the sectarians what's really going on in the church. Mother Superior leads Vincent out of the car and into the woods to finish him off, but the woman doesn't have the strength to shoot him, so she simply pushes him into a ravine and inflicts some mutilation. Beatrice arrives at the church just as the commotion begins, some trying to escape and some trying to expel Miguel, thinking that he's the one who brought the devil. The three of them are trapped, and hugging her friends, Ava activates the halo. Adriel tells Lilith that their destinies are intertwined, and they will conquer the world together. Feeling important for the first time, the girl believes the imposter. Miguel, Ava, and Beatrice manage to escape from the church, but now they risk being caught by the police or other fanatics, so the guy offers a safe haven, his house. Adriel tells Lilith about Ariella, the girl he loved and to whom he gave his halo. The prophet dreamed that together they would create a religion based on truth. Mother Superior also tells the nuns this story. When the angel first came to Earth 1,000 years ago, he created an underground upside-down church. But Ariella prayed for a long time to find the truth, and God answered the girl. He sent her a crown that was to stop the imposter. Adriel and Mother Superior simultaneously tell this story, but each does it differently. The nun thinks that Ariella saw evil in the prophet, while Adriel tells Lilith that the crown corrupted the beloved and she betrayed him. Ariella put the crown on the prophet's head, and he was imprisoned in a cave in which he spent 1,000 years, except that the girl paid for it with her own life. And Mother Superior warns Ava that no one has ever managed to defeat Adriel and survive. The company arrives at Jillian's house, from which Lilith's signal was last heard, but the doctor asks the guests to leave. Miguel then asks to tell the woman that her son is here. Seeing the boy, who is much older than the day they last met, Jillian falls on his neck and cannot hold back her tears. The nuns try to find out from the doctor where Lilith has gone to, but Jillian cannot answer the question. The only thing the doctor can tell is that the girl's physical and mental health has severely deteriorated. Mother Superior goes outside to talk on the phone. The bishop asks the abbess to come to a secret meeting where further struggles with Adriel will be decided. Miguel, who's really Michael, comes into his childhood room and looks at the drawings he drew when Adriel manipulated him. Camilla hears someone's voice again and is caught in a frightened state by Beatrice. Camilla confesses that after being stroked on the back by one of the sisters in the convent, the girl is suffering from severe headaches, and her friend suggests that she have a little examination. Jillian recalls the day Michael ran into the portal. Once on the other side, the boy wandered alone for a long time, and then the shining angels took him to Rhea, the lord of Adriel. It was she who trained the angel and then sent him to Earth to stop the evil. The abbess and Yasmin arrive at the meeting with the priests, where everyone is already gathered. The archbishop begins talking about Adriel, calling him a wolf in sheep's clothing. The charlatan himself, meanwhile, continues to tell Lilith about himself, complaining about his life in the dungeon. Angel offers to show his friend his difficult fate, and to do so he places burning fingers over her eyes. Jillian shows his son the face that ended up on her tape, and from what he sees, the boy faints. Beatrice does a scan of Camilla's spine, and during the procedure the girls are being frank with each other. One of the nuns confesses that she has doubts about Adriel, but if he really turns out to be the prophet, all the scriptures will lose their significance. The picture shows a cross inserted into Camilla's spine, which is what is causing the hallucinations. Unfortunately, Beatrice cannot remove it. Adriel asks Lilith forgiveness for the pain, but he convinces her to open her eyes, and when the burns come off, the girl sees demons and a completely different world, which she calls the truth. Beatrice finds Ava in the courtyard as she's practicing putting a wreath on the monument's head, but the halo goes off again and the girl falls. The nun tries to support a friend and assures her that they will defeat Adriel no matter what it takes. Christian meets Vincent in Arctac and reminds him that in just 2 days they will give the world to their master. A discussion breaks out at the meeting of priests. There are those who doubt Adriel's con game and believe that one cannot punish an angel without understanding his true purpose. At this, Bishop Francesco reveals to his colleagues the secret of Arctac, urging them to understand that all the punishments sent were nothing more than a trick. Mother Superior intervenes in the dispute, telling of the destruction of the members of the order. Apparently, the bishop and abbess have succeeded in convincing the crowd, but suddenly it transpires that half of those assembled are traitors, having defected to Adriel's side. A massacre of fanatics begins in the hall, and Mother Superior succeeds in removing only Francesco and Yasmin. The trio hides in the hotel gymnasium, but they can no longer get out, and Mother Superior calls Camille for help. Ava, Beatrice and Michael arrive at the inn, but the firstborns prove to be too many and the trio fears they cannot win. After examining the photograph of the cross in the spine and noticing a note from Beatrice, Jillian looks at Camilla through the glasses while she prays and sees the same waves that create the portal. The doctor guesses that Adriel is using the power of prayer to gain strength. Having heard the call, surviving nuns of the order arrive at Jillian's house. Ava takes the crowd of firstborns away, and Beatrice and Michael deal with the remaining two. The abbess commands her subjects to leave, but the bishop refuses, determined to expose Adriel to the full. Running from her pursuers, Ava runs through a wall and finds herself outside at a great height. The girl's halo shuts down again and she falls. Beatrice mourns her friend, but she opens her eyes and the artifact begins to glow again. Bishop surrenders to the traitors, hoping they will lead him to Adriel. The imposter angel himself, meanwhile, tells Lilith how much they will accomplish together after they cleanse the world with pain. The master's trust inspires the girl so much that she grows wings. And that concludes episode 5. Come back tomorrow for the next episode. Guys, if you don't want to miss anything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. In the first scenes of the film, a woman is driving a car on a night highway. Suddenly, an unknown woman's voice speaking Russian comes from the radio. Joe translates for her daughter Alice, explaining that the woman believes the world has turned upside down. A police car appears behind them, and an unknown device lying next to Joe starts blinking alarmingly, but the police car drives past. Soon, the pair arrives at a small house. Joe starts a fire and puts the child to bed. She then goes outside to check the device left in the car but hears her daughter scream and rushes back inside. However, Alice is asleep. Joe runs outside again, hears her daughter scream again, and runs off into the night. 5 weeks earlier, Joe is floating weightlessly as part of a group of astronauts on the International Space Station. She only sees her daughter and husband Magnus via video calls, and she conducts her next session from the cold nuclear fusion laboratory where Mission Commander Paul is working. He adjusts the equipment according to instructions from scientist Henry Calder on Earth. The scientists are searching for a new state of matter, but no one knows what it is. Suddenly, something crashes into the space station. Communication with Earth is lost, and a fire breaks out. Additionally, the commander's hand is trapped, and one of the Soyuz ships is severely damaged. Roscosmos takes charge of the repairs while the mission's doctor amputates Paul's hand. Henry insists they must save the capsule containing the cold fusion experiment results. Meanwhile, Joe goes into open space to inspect the crash site, unaware that Paul's heart has stopped. Suddenly, video contact with Joe is lost, and the center can only hear her communications. She then sees the cause of the accident: a desiccated body of a female astronaut in an orange suit labeled USSR. Joe tries to catch it, but the space mummy floats away. Joe reports everything to her colleague, and Irina, the head of Roscosmos, hears it on Earth. Learning of the commander's death, the center orders 3 mission members to return to Earth on Soyuz 2, while Joe repairs Soyuz 1-inch and returns on it. An emergency mode is set in the ship. Joe sketches the body she saw, sends it to the center, and begins repairs. Meanwhile, Irina tells Henry she ordered his equipment to be left on the station, as it may have caused the accident. Henry argues that this experiment could change humanity's life and must be brought back. The returning Soyuz 2 astronauts are greeted on Earth. Joe is asked to retrieve the capsule with the experiment results, after which communication is lost. On Earth, Henry brings equipment for a rescue mission to Baikonur, but Irina reports that there are no signs of life on the station. Joe is alive and continues repairing the equipment, resting in the shuttle where Paul's body lies. Later, she records a message for her family, but unexpectedly hears a man's voice telling her not to breathe. She flies to the laboratory door and, opening it, sees Paul reaching out to her. Joe shakes his hand, realizing it's the commander's severed limb. Meanwhile, on Earth, Henry pulls strings to send a rescue mission to the station, avoiding questions about his twin brother. At this time, his twin brother Pat Calder is on vacation on a cruise ship, answering a journalist's questions about his spaceflight and snapping at her for confusing him with his brother. Joe restores the power supply of Soyuz 1 and returns for the cold fusion capsule. She records a final message to her family and launches the shuttle. Unexpectedly, the automatic detachment doesn't work. It must be done manually from inside the station. Joe, in desperation, punches the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel and the system activates. The shuttle heads to Earth, where Joe is presumed dead. The module soon lands in a deserted steppe where rescuers find Joe and help her out. She is placed on a stretcher and taken to a helicopter. However, Alice rushes to her, and Joe happily embraces her daughter and husband, who seems to doubt his wife's genuine joy at seeing him. Henry retrieves the capsule, and Joe is taken to the helicopter where her family is already seated. But suddenly, Joe finds herself alone in an empty vehicle. Then everything returns to normal. She decides it's due to stress. She speaks to her daughter in Swedish, but Alice doesn't understand her. Meanwhile, Henry rejoices over the successful quantum mechanics experiment results conducted on the ISS. Joe recovers after the flight. One day at a press conference, she expresses condolences to the widow of the deceased astronaut Paul, but the woman's name turns out to be different. Henry demonstrates the experiment results obtained on Earth. His assistant is sure this is only possible in space, dismissing it as a glitch. At Baikonur, an investigation into the tragedy begins. The commission reviews orbital recordings. When Joe mentions the object that caused the accident, a Soviet female astronaut's body, no one believes her since there has never been a report of a missing female astronaut in history. Later, Joe receives vitamin tablets she must take daily. She tries to get closer to her husband, not noticing he seems to avoid her. Alice also keeps her distance from her mother. The next day, Joe faces the commission again, which tries to convince her that the station collided with an orange garbage bag. After the session, her boss, Frederick, tries to hug her, but she steps back in confusion. He doesn't understand why she has forgotten everything between them. Scared, Joe returns to her husband in tears, confesses her love, and they become intimate. Meanwhile, Henry tells Alice about a thought experiment in quantum mechanics called Schrödinger's cat. Scientists believed the world was governed by classical physics laws until geniuses like Einstein discovered that the same substance could exist in two forms. For example, a particle is black in one world and white in another. Between worlds, there is space where the particle is both black and white simultaneously, refusing to choose until observed. Henry invented equipment for the space experiment and discovered something, but it seems unwilling to come into the light. Magnus confesses his wife has changed completely. Henry comes to thank Joe for saving the capsule. She recalls he worked on the Apollo mission, and the old man warns that people who go through the space often change. Later, the team goes to the memorial alley, and Joe shows friends a photo of the spacesuit she saw in space, but she's told it's Irina, the current director of the Flight Control Center. The colleagues reach the tree planted by Commander Paul before the flight and lay flowers. When Joe is alone, she suddenly sees Paul, who tells her his heart is still hanging in space. After this, Joe acknowledges the commission's correctness and retracts her initial testimony. Her family heads home, where Joe notices some inconsistencies. For example, the car is blue, but Joe remembers it was red. The family congratulates Joe on past Christmas and her birthday. She jokes and laughs, though Magnus admits he believed their marriage was over. The next morning, Joe walks around the house and suddenly sees a piano. She sits at it and opens the sheet music. In the evening, Joe again notices her daughter doesn't understand her Swedish, though the girl spoke it fluently before the flight. Magnus admits he knew about her affair with a colleague, Frederick. This perplexes Joe as it's not true. Henry recalls a formula where the main stress relief component is lithium-7. Joe visits a psychologist who prescribes her the antidepressant lithium. Henry notices her and invites her to see his laboratory, where he talks about astronauts who heard non-existent sounds and smells after flights. But this is kept secret. Then Henry reports to the management that using laser and magnets in the cold fusion laboratory, he obtained an image identical to the one from the quantum physics experiment on the ISS. He tried to capture the moment when a substance exists in two different states simultaneously. The same experiment with Schrodinger's cat, which can't be determined if it's alive or dead. But only Henry sees the results. Apparently, this is the observer effect, where the experiment influences the experimenter. Jo approaches the piano again and starts playing this time, scaring herself because she never knew how to play. The next day, Jo compares the vitamins she received at Baikonur with the prescribed medicine and finds that both contain lithium-7. Suddenly, she sees two workers and hides in an office, finding a list of astronauts. Each name has a letter, and checking those under B, she discovers they were all prescribed lithium-7 and experienced unusual things. Meanwhile, the workers enter the office, ignore Jo, and start stacking folders on a cart. She tries to get their attention but seems invisible. Jo approaches a man closely. He screams and disappears. Jo is alone in the office again. She goes to Henry's office, but he suddenly accuses her of excessive curiosity that will ruin her. Later, her colleague Frederick visits, not understanding what happened as they loved each other. Jo avoids the conversation. At home, Jo finds a package with tapes on the table. It turns out the Marine Observatory workers, unlike the Flight Control Center, heard her calls from space and recorded them, now sending them to her. Jo plays the tapes and hears her voice when Alice comes downstairs and sees a room filled with mourning people. Live astronaut Paul with his family, and Jo's portrait in a mourning frame at the center. She screams, but her father carries Alice upstairs, where his wife admits all her pills are neuroleptics, meaning she's been intentionally habituated to them. She believes she was heard but deliberately left to die in space. Magnus grabs the phone to have her taken for treatment, but Jo pushes him and he falls, hitting the floor. Jo pulls herself together, calls an ambulance, and asks Alice to get in the car. On the way, she stops by the laboratory and steals the flask with the substance obtained in the quantum physics experiment. Henry hears a knock at the door but finds no one in the hallway when he opens it. The scientist closes the door, not noticing his twin brother Pat, who briefly appears behind him and then disappears. Irina calls, having just read an article about two particles entangled by quantum mechanics, where what happens to one determines the state of the other, even if they are far apart. He hangs up without responding. Jo calls Russian cosmonaut Ilya to ask what vitamins he was given on the ISS. He reads out the name with letter A. Jo explains that, unlike the rest of the crew, she was given neuroleptics. The cosmonaut is skeptical, but she asks him to check his pills and wait for her call. Henry discovers the flask theft. The next morning, Jo asks her daughter to describe her fears in detail. The girl admits she hears the voice of an unknown woman named Valya. Jo steps aside to call the observatory worker who sent her the tapes, but he unexpectedly claims it couldn't have been her and hangs up. Meanwhile, Alice brings her a drawing of her fear, showing the figure of a female astronaut in an orange suit, whom Jo saw dead in space. Ilya checks his pills, which turn out to be vitamins. However, documents on the substances given to Jo are no longer accessible. Jo arrives at the Marine Observatory and meets the brother and sister who sent her the tapes. The elderly couple clearly heard her voice from space and recorded it. However, the recordings can only be heard on their ship at sea. They take Jo and Alice to a boat, sharing strange stories of people seeing odd things in space like angels, and often going mad upon returning home. They recorded everything, but there was little noise until Apollo 18. During that mission, the airwaves were filled. Deciphering these messages is challenging. The boat sets off, and the woman plays a tape recorded in 1967. It features the voice of a female astronaut returning to Earth in a damaged capsule, seemingly dying. That day, Irina allegedly returned unharmed from space. The woman can also let Jo hear Paul's voice, though everyone says he's dead. Jo refuses to listen. They head back to shore, and Alice secretly calls her father, revealing their location. The woman gives Jo the tapes. Mother and daughter drive to a forest cabin, analyzing everything that happened. Alice plays the 1967 tape again, recognizing Valya's voice from her visions. The woman is in pain and very hot, as heard on the tape. Henry looks into a mirror, calling his twin brother. When Pat appears in the reflection, Henry accuses him of stopping his medication and admits his space experience worsened everything. Jo and Alice continue listening to Valya, who says the world is upside down. Reaching the house, Jo plays a recording of her conversation with Alice before the collision, but the girl suddenly claims it wasn't her, as she doesn't speak Swedish. The action shifts to the ISS on the day of the accident, showing the other side of Schrodinger's cat experiment. Paul conducts a quantum physics experiment while Jo talks to Alice when an alarm sounds. Jo is thrown against the window, hitting her head and losing consciousness. Paul tries to help her, realizing she's dead. Her husband and daughter are informed of her death and fly to Baikonur. On the orbit, Paul stays to repair the shuttle, worried that accessing the laboratory is impossible, leaving the experiment results on the station. Joe's body is moved to the shuttle, but Paul struggles to accept her death's reality. Later, he rests before landing, recording messages. Again, he feels Joe is alive and even asks her not to breathe. He then contacts Houston, reports the body's damage, moves her from the ship to the station section, and locks her there. Preparing for undocking, the system fails. Mission Control reminds him that 2 people are needed to activate the system. Paul, like Joe in another reality, hits the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel and the system activates. The shuttle lands safely. Paul's family greets him, but he can't forget what happened, feeling guilty for leaving Joe's body on the ISS. He goes to her tree, laying flowers, and suddenly sees Joe before him. They stare at each other for a moment, then she vanishes. Later, Paul tells Joe's family how she died when he sees his portrait in a mourning frame. He's distracted by a question about visiting a psychologist and snaps back to reality. Later, the astronaut appears before the commission and recounts the experiment and the accident. Suddenly, the crew members object. They know nothing about a quantum physics experiment. That project was closed 12 years ago, and the order to leave Joe's body in orbit, it was his decision, not an order he received. Meanwhile, Alice is deeply affected by her mother's loss, constantly feeling that something is off. At the same time, Paul reviews footage from the Apollo 18 mission and is surprised to discover that 2 astronauts died during the launch under Henry Calder's command. He goes to his boss, but she only knows Pat Calder. There was no equipment and no Nobel Prize. The Apollo 18 mission was NASA's biggest failure. The man returns to his family and realizes that his wife's name is different from what he remembers. Later, his family goes to Joe's house for a memorial service, but Alice is hiding in the closet again, refusing to come out, convinced that her mother is alive. Seeing his crew, Paul doesn't want to enter the house, but his wife persuades him, though he admits everything feels wrong. Then his daughter brings Alice. He turns his head and sees another Alice screaming about what's happening in the living room. Joe rushes to the sound, seeing Alice from Paul's reality and trying to call out to her mother. Magnus takes his daughter away, and she asks to be taken to her mother's cabin. The next day, Magnus and Alice go to the lake house. At night, the father confesses he doesn't understand his daughter, who insists they will see their mother again. Meanwhile, Paul visits the house of Henry's twin brother, Pat, calling him Henry and stating that he conducted experiments under his direction. He wants to know the truth at any cost, but Pat pulls out a gun and shoots him. Alice sees a car approaching the cabin, and Joe gets out. And then everything gets confusing, so friends, forgive me if something is unclear. The girl hurriedly puts on her shoes and goes outside, but it's empty in front of the house. She calls for her mother, and Joe, in another reality, from the beginning of the film, turns at her voice but doesn't see her daughter. Alice returns to the house, puts on a coat, and goes out into the night with a flashlight. Joe distinctly hears footsteps passing by, but sees no one. They wander around the same place, shouting, hearing voices, but not seeing each other. In her reality, Joe and Alice sit in the cabin, listening to space recordings again. The girl admits her memories are different. Firstly, she doesn't speak Swedish. Also, her mother said Paul conducts experiments in the lab. The problem is the mother remembers nothing about this lab. She explains that the merging of 2 different realities is the result of a quantum experiment aiming to capture superposition, the moment when one thing exists in different places simultaneously. The girl suddenly confesses she feels Joe isn't her mother. Meanwhile, in another world, Magnus, accompanied by Henry and the police, heads to the lake house to retrieve Alice. Joe, stepping out to check the device, hears Alice's scream from the snowy field again. But her Alice is sleeping in the cabin. Joe runs outside again, heading towards the scream. At this time, parallel Alice finds a similar cabin, but it's cold and empty. Despite the building's similarities, the girl finds many discrepancies. For example, the picture on the wall is different. She goes upstairs and finds a closet. Hanging her necklace on the handle, Alice climbs inside. But the door suddenly slams shut, and the girl starts banging and calling for help. Joe, wandering through the field, also sees this cabin. She rushes to the banging and finds Alice. Joe carries the girl to her cabin, puts her in a hot bath, and admits that Alice smells like herself again. Stepping aside, Joe finds herself between 2 worlds, with Alice standing by the bed in one and the girl sitting in the bath in the other. Suddenly, the second Alice stops seeing Joe, gets out of the bath, and calls for her mother. But Magnus wakes up and runs to her. Alice admits she saw her mother, but now she's gone again. Joe, meanwhile, orders the second girl to get dressed and takes her to find the second cabin and the other Alice. Magnus's car is stopped by a blocked road, but the police inform him that a bulldozer is on the way. Alice asks her mother to come back, and Joe admits she doesn't belong to this world, urging them to figure out where the Joe from this reality went. Alice runs away, accusing her mother of madness. The second Alice goes to find the second cabin. Magnus follows her. The girl walks across the field, seeing a bead from her necklace in the snow. She follows the trail and finds a bag with a quantum device. Parallel Alice finds the second cabin. She enters, looks around, and takes an identical tape recorder, climbing into the closet. The second Alice also arrives at this closet and sees the tape recorder inside. The first Alice turns on the recorder and records her voice, calling Alice. The second Alice turns on the tape recorder and hears her own voice asking her to say something. While the girls establish contact, their parents search frantically through the frozen field and house. Joe finally reaches the closet. In her reality, Magnus approaches the same spot. Joe finds the tape recorder and hears the conversation between the two Alices. Magnus sees and hears the same thing. Terrified, he calls emergency services, reporting his daughter is missing at the lake. Joe gets into the car and heads towards the lake, as the kerosene lamp in her cabin falls and sets it on fire. The two Alices, sitting in the closet, look into the mirror and suddenly see each other. They say they are both looking for their mom. One Alice confesses that her mother died. At this moment, Joe notices the fire behind her. She turns the car around. The two Alices compare memories shared by Joe and conclude that their mothers switch places. Meanwhile, on the winter road, Henry Calder admits to Magnus that when he was on the moon, he thought his crew had died. But miraculously, they were alive. After returning to Earth, he started treatment. Rescuers finally arrive at the lake and start searching for Alice. Henry sees the fire blazing. Joe returns to the burning house, but upon entering, she finds no fire. However, the mirror reflects a burning room. Joe goes upstairs and finds her daughter in the closet, witnessing the conversation between the two Alices. Henry finds his quantum device stolen and lost by Joe. Joe hears the voice of the second Alice and sees her in the mirror. The girl asks her to come home, but Joe doesn't know how to do it. However, she promises to figure it out. She realizes the girls are dying, one in the fire, the other from the cold. She pulls the girl out and hands her to Henry, who has just arrived. Then she returns to the fire. Henry lays the girl in the snow and also calls for help, while Joe walks around the burning house. Suddenly, she sees Alice lying in the snow. She tries to revive her, hearing her voice behind. Turning around, she sees the second Alice, who suddenly says she doesn't feel her double. Apparently, the girl died, but Joe continues giving artificial respiration, believing she must save the girl. Suddenly, Magnus's voice calls out from the darkness. Joe tells her daughter to leave. Magnus sees his wife, unable to believe his eyes, and runs to her, finding his daughter. In the parallel reality, Joe revives the second Alice and starts looking for the second Alice. Rescuers grab her, thinking she's crazy. In the other world, Magnus brings Alice into the cabin, admitting he doesn't know what he saw. The injured Alice lies under an IV and suddenly hears a female voice promising to take her to her mom. The girl wakes up, seeing her father, who says Joe left with Irina. In reality, Joe is taken to a psychiatric clinic. Henry finds the tape recorder and listens to his report, discovering his colleagues are alive. He smashes his quantum device, destroying the experiment results. Magnus brings Alice home, and the girl says her mother is dead, her body still in space. Also, there is another Alice. Magnus tries to convince her that mom is alive, just not well right now. Meanwhile, a piano is brought to Joe's room. Henry is arrested for attempting to kill Paul and murdering a journalist on the ship. He requests his DNA be compared to the person who lived where Paul was shot. He's not Pat. The accuser suddenly says both men are actually the same person and shows a book written by Pat. Henry denies writing it, revealing that his so-called twin brother is actually his double from another reality. Later, Henry shows the broken device to Frederick, blaming Joe for damaging expensive equipment. He has long opposed sending women into space, believing their psyche is unstable. That night, Joe regains consciousness and tries to escape the clinic, but the door is locked. In the morning, Irina examines her, finding no mental disorders. Joe claims there was a fire in the cabin, and before that, she saw her real daughter. Irina asks her to play the piano and says her daughter is with her father. Joe is impossible to convince. Then Irina announces that Joe is pregnant. They couldn't give her lithium, as they never prescribe it to pregnant women, so they developed special vitamins for her, which Irina asks her to take. Joe is horrified and refuses. She can't have this child, because then she won't be able to return to her real life. Irina says there's another patient like her in the next room, but she won't be able to see him. Joe suddenly recognizes her as the dried-up mummy in space. She screams the words she heard on the recording, but Irina runs away. She calls Henry and asks for a meeting. Pat Calder is interrogated with a lie detector, denying shooting Paul, though he invented the machine that could cause an accident in space. Joe sits at the piano, but Ilya comes to her. She's very happy to see him, asking him to find out where Henry Calder is, but he suddenly starts convincing her that Joe is experiencing astronaut burnout, which fortunately is treatable. Joe repeats that the ISS collided with Irina's body. In that reality, it wasn't Paul who died, but her. Ilya doesn't believe her, and she asks him to leave. He says goodbye and secretly slips a key to her door, signaling that the room is bugged. Magnus tells the doctor he also saw Joe in the dark. Parallel. Magnus says he wants to get closer to this new Joe. Irina meets with Henry. He recalls her flight when she returned alive and unharmed, but years later he learned that Irina died in a space accident. She convinces him they both survived such accidents but returned, though they always felt another person nearby. Henry suddenly declares he's not Henry. He disappeared and won't return. He's the person who won the Nobel Prize. That night, Joe escapes her room, goes to the next room, and sees two identical old men. She returns to her room. The next day, Paul's daughter discusses a strange feeling with Alice. The girl feels her father's presence. Alice confesses that her mom is also halfway not here. In the parallel reality, Paul's daughter is puzzled by her father's strange behavior, who went to see a crazy old man and got shot. In both realities, Alice finishes talking to her friend and gets out of the closet. One asks her father to take her to mom in the hospital and pulls out a tape recorder. The other packs the deceased Joe's things and also finds a tape recorder. The girls simultaneously turn them on. When Joe in the hospital starts playing, they connect with each other. Later, the second Alice tells her father there's another Alice and promises she won't search for mom anymore. The prosecutor reports the complete identity of all tests, confirming that Pat and Henry are the same person, and presses charges. Sometime later, Irina comes to Joe, announcing there's only one person in the next room, the first one in space. She advises Joe to take the pills and return to life. She has a daughter and will have another child. She advises Joe to reconcile and move on. Later, Magnus and Alice arrive at the clinic. The girl talks about the other Alice and also advises her mother to accept what happened. She needs a mother, and Joe needs a daughter. So they will move on. Later, Joe shows Magnus their daughter's drawing, admitting she tries to be rational. She will return home and move on. They will have this child. Irina writes a letter admitting that since her flight, she has hidden the fact that space drives people crazy. She asks everyone who has experienced this to report it to her. At the clinic, Paul regains consciousness, unable to understand what he saw and experienced. Magnus takes Joe home, admitting she doesn't look like his wife. But they love each other and want to be a family. Irina says goodbye to Alice, admitting she has a second name, Valia. Meanwhile, on the orbiting ISS, Joe's mutilated body suddenly comes to life and catches a photo of herself with her daughter. This is where the first season ends.
They are heroes, and they're going to space.
In 1963, the Cold War between the USA and the USSR intensifies, and nuclear war seems inevitable. Understanding that humanity could be wiped off the face of the earth, President John Kennedy orders the development of a secret plan to ensure humanity's survival. A group of scientists creates the spaceship Ascension and selects 600 volunteers who are sent to Proxima Centauri with the task of colonizing the planet. But the journey will take hundreds of years, meaning generations will succeed one another. 2 generations later, the ship is mainly inhabited by the grandchildren of the first astronauts, and the environment reflects the 1960s. In honor of the 51st anniversary of the launch, a grand party is held on the ship. Looking at the inhabitants, it seems the mission has been successful. People have obviously adapted to the living conditions. However, the first impression is deceptive, as social inequality exists here too. Wealthy and well-off families get good jobs and live on the upper decks, while the poor are limited in comfort. One day, a young woman named Lorelei picks up a package from the butcher and goes to swim on the artificial beach. But shortly afterward, a girl named Krista finds her lifeless body and alerts the ship with a loud scream. Despite the passing years, the chief engineer of the spaceship, who remained on Earth, is still alive. But now his place is taken by his son, Harris, who does everything to keep the Ascension project under tight security and monitors all news. Learning of Lorelei's death, Harris's assistant advises informing the project director, Catherine Warren. However, Harris fears that this could jeopardize the project and tarnish his father's legacy. Meanwhile, Dr. Juliette Bryce examines the dead body and finds strange marks on the deceased's wrists. The ship's captain, William, assigns the responsibility for investigating this case to the project executive director, Aaron Gall. He soon discovers one oddity: there is no image of Lorelei entering the beach. Later, Galt learns that Lorelei was seeing a guy named James Toback, who worked in water purification. He sets out to find him, but to no avail. On the same day, the forensic results show that Lorelei had been making love a few hours before her death. A bullet was extracted from her palate. This alarms Galt, since officially there are no weapons on board the ship. He immediately informs the captain of the news. Meanwhile, Krista has to be hospitalized, as she is shocked by the incident and says someone is watching her. But even as she begins to recover, the girl insists that there is no life in space, so they must return to Earth. She is also sure that Lorelei died because she learned something forbidden. Soon, Galt apprehends James Toback. The guy admits he saw Lorelei on the day of her death. However, she left abruptly after a quarrel, and he was not close to her that day. Galt and Toback go to the beach and start searching for clues. Suddenly, they stumble upon a hidden passageway that Lorelei apparently used, explaining her absence on the surveillance footage. Galt and Officer Duke inspect the discovered entrance and find the place where the girl was killed, as well as a book with maps of the water filtration system and blueprints of the navigation computer, which recently malfunctioned. It becomes clear that this is sabotage, intended to force the ship to return to Earth. Duke and his men descend to the lower decks, where the Butcher Stokes provokes a fight, but then an alarm sounds about an approaching powerful radiation storm. The order is given for everyone to take shelter in their capsules, but then the captain learns that the protective shields are jammed and sends Galt and an electrician to fix them. Thanks to their efforts, the door eventually closes. The electrician then confesses that he saw Stokes giving Lorelei a gun before she was killed. At the same time, Dr. Juliette puts Krista to bed and leaves her a seahorse-shaped necklace, claiming it will protect her. However, when the spaceship enters the radiation zone and everyone seals themselves in their capsules, Krista sees a strange man in a suit entering her room. After the ship safely passes through the radiation storm and everyone is allowed to exit, Galt and Duke go to the lower deck again, find a gun with Stokes, and take him into custody. The man is interrogated, but he continues to insist that he was framed because he is from the lower deck and it is easy to make him the culprit. Meanwhile, the door to Stokes' cell automatically opens. He exits and retrieves a hidden gun from his cabin. After the funeral, Galt speaks to the captain. William admits that he was close to Lorelei, but he did not kill her. It is then that Stokes appears, taking a random girl hostage. He demands a fair trial. Galt lunges at Stokes, freeing the girl. The captain quickly leads her to safety, while Stokes and Galt continue to fight. In the end, Stokes is ejected into space, but instead of instant death, he lands on an inflatable mattress where a group of people detains him. It becomes clear that the entire project is just a simulation, a test of the viability of generations of people in spaceflight. But the people on the ship believe they were sent on an important mission and have been flying in space for 51 years. Director Warren somehow learns about the recent events. Enraged, she storms into the Mission Control Center and warns Harris not to hide anything. Harris claims that Stokes is the murderer, but the director is not convinced, and she sends a consultant named Samantha Kruger to oversee the project. At the same time, an unknown man sets a bomb in the ship's cobalt generator, which explodes after some time. Harris and Kruger rush into the facility housing the spaceship. Fortunately, there are no reports of casualties, and the injured are taken to the medical center. Captain William inspects the explosion site and discovers graffiti on the wall, confirming it was a deliberate act. But fearing accusations of incompetence, he conceals the true cause. Outside, Kruger demands access to the surveillance footage. On the ship, Galt goes to the lower decks to meet with the person responsible for the generators, named Dwight, but he panics and attacks the director. Regaining consciousness, Galt continues the investigation and learns that the explosion that killed his parents 20 years ago was similar to the recent one. He hypothesizes that Dwight was likely involved in Lorelai's murder because Stokes didn't know how to use a gun, therefore he couldn't have killed the girl. Harris and his assistant learn that the other side of the deck is no longer airtight, and the team inside can hear sounds from outside. This creates a risk of exposure. Galt finds Dwight and a fight ensues, during which Dwight somehow manages to escape and start a bomb timer. Alarmed, Harris orders everyone to leave the area immediately. Fortunately, Galt manages to defuse the bomb, but Dwight dies. Kruger blames Harris for this, but he argues the goal of the project is to determine human capabilities. However, later Harris gives Dr. Juliet's necklace to his wife, indicating that he was the one who broke into Krista's room and stole the necklace. At the same time, Kruger begins her own investigation and discovers that several scientists involved in the Ascension project were found dead or went missing in the 1960s. Meanwhile, on the ship, everyone prepares for the next round of vaccinations, but Krista refuses the shot, convinced that they want to kill her. The librarian volunteers to take the shot instead, but after receiving the medication, she loses consciousness. Kruger demands an explanation, but Harris insists that these are routine immunizations and is concerned for the girl who didn't get the shot. He orders the medicine to be added to milk, but Krista figures out his plan and pours it out. Kruger meets with Eva, the author of a website tracking the fates of 1960s scientists. Eva claims the government used the project as a cover to abduct children for participation. Later, an unknown man pursues Krista and tries to forcibly vaccinate her, but he injures himself and stains the girl's dress with his blood, allowing her to escape. Galt takes her to Dr. Juliet and convinces her to get the shot. While preparing, Krista tells Dr. Robert Bryce about visions she's had lately. These include falling from a twin tower, a war in the desert, and tragedies in the ocean. She also claims to have seen Dr. Bryce in the maintenance tunnel where Lorelai was killed. The doctor becomes enraged, gags her, and administers the shot. Harris and his assistant, who saw this, are shocked that Krista described events that actually happened on Earth. Dr. Bryce finds a blood sample match from Krista's dress with his wife's student, Mesmer. However, the boy is found dead in his cabin. Kruger concludes that Harris has an accomplice on the ship who is causing disturbances and radiation storms. On the ship, the day of the lottery arrives, allowing the winning couple to have a child. Since population numbers must be strictly maintained, a new person can only appear after someone's death. And now 3 people have died. Soon the names are announced. Among the winners are Officer Duke and his wife. Krista notices a woman outside her cabin and follows her, but suddenly she realizes it's the ghost of Lorelai. At that moment, someone starts playing a video showing her tryst with Captain William. Everyone in the room laughs while Krista starts screaming uncontrollably. Harris observes this and notices that the girl began reacting even before the video played, as if she could see the future. He is amazed. His father predicted this phenomenon in 3 generations and called it morphic resonance. Kruger steals the keys to Stokes' cell, later presenting a report sharply criticizing Harris, prompting Director Warren to come to the project. While Kruger sneaks into Stokes' cell, he attacks her and takes her hostage, and there he learns the truth about the Ascension project. This shocks Stokes, leading to a mental breakdown. However, Kruger persuades him that they must escape before they are noticed and killed. She is willing to help him because the entire project is unethical. As they step outside, Stokes cries, but Kruger urges him to pull himself together. A guard approaches them, and they team up to neutralize him. In the process, Kruger gets injured. Stokes goes to the nearest store to buy medical supplies. They then go to a motel together. Warren and Harris learn about the escape and call security from the company TC, which turns out to have funded the project. The management is unhappy with the director's work and accuses Harris of covering up facts. Harris panics and begs Warren for a second chance, but it is in vain. On the ship, Duke learns that Galt has started investigating his wife, suspecting her of killing Lorelai. He loses his temper and confronts Galt. At the same time, Krista has another vision. She foresees a violent fight between Duke and Galt and runs to the beach. Anxious, she unintentionally uses telekinesis. However, she loses control of her power and shuts down all the ship's electricity. Warren blames Harris for the incident and orders her henchmen to get rid of him. Terrified, Harris talks about morphic resonance. It turns out that Warren has long awaited this result. They rush to the control center and learn that all the ship's systems shut down due to a power surge, but the artificial stars still shine. Harris's father embedded the starlights in the ship's nuclear reactor to ensure the illusion's eternity. Harris suggests using the nuclear reactor to restore the system's functionality. Meanwhile, Toback receives a weak TV signal and informs Dr. Bryce. However, the latter sends the guy away under a flimsy pretext, then turns off the screen. It becomes clear that he is Harris's accomplice. Kruger meets with Eva and explains everything to her. She plans to flee abroad and seek asylum before exposing the project's deceit. Eva tries to dissuade her, and Kruger realizes that the journalist also works for the TC company. Eva confesses everything and shoots Kruger. Stokes manages to escape. The oxygen on the ship begins to run out. Captain William and Galt go to the lower decks to activate the carbon dioxide scrubbers and declare a radiation storm for the others to conserve oxygen. Harris concludes that the chances of getting the ship back to working condition are extremely low, so Warren decides to extract Krista before she suffocates. William and Galt realize the scrubbers are beyond repair, so they decide to clean the air manually. Krista senses someone coming to take her. Dr. Bryce confirms this, and when Krista accuses him of killing Lorelei, he confesses. The woman learned about the fake mission, and he couldn't allow the exposure. Galt and William successfully distribute lithium dioxide throughout the ship using large fans, restoring oxygen levels. At that moment, Warren's envoy arrives, and Dr. Bryce tries to stop him, but the brute easily brushes him aside and grabs Krista. Galt sees Lorelei's ghost, who leads him to Krista. It turns out he has also developed resonance. Galt attacks the thug. Krista uses her power again, making the opponents dissolve into thin air. Seeing all this, Warren panics and tries to contact the envoy by radio. She moves closer to the ship, and Harris takes advantage of the moment to push her down, killing her. Galt finds himself on an unknown planet. The idea is generally good, especially for fans of detective fiction, and one can't help but wonder, what if Earth is the same kind of spaceship, and all the people on the planet are participants in an experiment?